Welcome to Talking Data Equity for Friday, December 19th. My name is Heather Kraus, and we are so grateful that you found us and chose to spend your time with us today. Talking Data Equity is run by my organization, which is called We All Count, and we're a project for equity in all things data. And I'd be happy to talk to you later about the courses that we do and the tools that we build. But we're going to hop right into talking data equity today so that we can make the most of our valuable guests' time. Talking Data Equity is a weekly event that is an informal drop-in. There's no charge. Anybody from any sector, from any country who's interested in embedding equity in the data projects that they are working on is welcome to come. And every single Friday is different. Some Fridays we talk about a tool, sometimes we talk about a statistical technique, and sometimes we have people share stories of the data equity work they are doing. And that is who we have today, a really amazing story that I'm so excited to hear more about. And so before I introduce you to our special guest, quick housekeeping note, and that is that this is being recorded. And the reason that we record it is so we can share it in our data equity forum. And the data equity forum is something I'm putting the link to in the chat. And you can always go there, ask questions across sectors, across countries about your data equity projects. Me and my team are in there almost every day, as are hundreds of community members. So you can watch videos there. You can catch up on past talking data equities there. And please join us. The other link I put in the chat is the Talking Data Equity homepage. That is where you can find out who is going to be talking or what technique we're going to be covering on a weekly basis. And last but not least, this is a Zoom meeting, which means you have control over your microphone and your video. So you can set them in the way that you're going to feel most connected and learn the best. We do, however, ask that you keep your microphone turned off while our special guests are sharing their story and their slides. If there's time at the end, we will have a time where you can turn your microphones on and ask questions, share reflections, share your experiences with the topic. But while they're sharing, please put your questions and your reflections in the Zoom chat. Use the Zoom chat as much as you'd like. You can chat privately to me or publicly using that drop-down set to everyone. Okay. This is all the time I want to take with logistics because we have a very cool group of people joining us today. There are 4 special guests joining us today. And excuse me. First, we have Gail Gerard. And Gail was the Chief Innovation Counsel at the United States Agency for International Development until September 2025. Gail worked with staff across the agency to ensure that USAID's programs operated within legal parameters. She was known for seeking creative solutions to push the limits to facilitate efficiency and effectiveness. She also worked as the legal advisor at World Vision, helping the nonprofit effectively implement U.S. assistance awards around the world. And before doing all these amazing things, she spent the first 15 years of her career working at 3 law firms after clerking for the Honorable Kenneth R. Harkins in the U.S. State Court of Federal Claims. Growing up in Michigan, Gail received her bachelor's from Michigan State. Go Wolverines, I think, maybe. And a JD from the University of Toledo. All right. Joining Gail to tell this amazing story about data is Dr. Amber Gove. Amber is an economist and a researcher with more than 2 decades of experience supporting governments to measure and improve learning. She co-created the early grade reading assessment and Tangerine, which are open source tools now used worldwide to track learning progress. And as the Chief Impact Officer at Tangerine Central, Amber leads strategy to help governments and organizations leverage low-cost technology data and low-cost technology and data-driven insights to ensure that every child learns. Third, I want to introduce you to the amazing Erin Meyer. Erin is a senior data project manager at the Inter-University Consortium for Political and Social Research. And if you've never heard of that organization, it is because we almost all refer to it as the ICPSR. It's this giant data center at the University of Michigan. And since 2020, Erin has managed projects to preserve and expand access to social science data, with recent work focusing on data rescue and managing data lumos. Data lumos is something we're going to hear about today. ICPSR's Archive for At-Risk Government Data. Previously, Erin developed harmonized public and restricted use census data projects with IPUMS USA at the University of Minnesota, another product we all know and love. And last in alphabetical order, but very much not least, Dr. Hethel sorry. True confessions, I have COVID, but I wasn't going to miss this for the world, so excuse me on this. Dr. Hethel Thukral spent 24 years ensuring that kids can read and do math. Turns out that that's harder than it sounds. At her firm, Sustain Ed, sorry, I'll take care of that in a second. At her firm, Sustain Ed LLC, she develops and implements sustainable education solutions for governments in Africa. And until July 2025, she was USAID's Center for Education and was responsible for reporting the impact of USAID's $1.2 billion annual education investment across 60 global offices. So you can see that all four of these women have been doing very important and powerful things, and they have Spartans. Sorry, there goes Spartans. They have a very important story to tell us, and I'm going to turn it entirely over to them. Thank you so much for joining us.
Hi, everyone. I'm going to get us started. This is Hethel, and I will take us through kind of the early part of our story. Thank you, Heather. Really appreciate it. You've brought us in, and thanks for giving us space to share our work. I want to make sure before we dive into it that we did have one additional person that was part of this team, Callie Ardington, who is at the University of Cape Town, who wasn't able to be with us, but a very important member of this work. So I'm going to actually take our talk through, we're going to use a timeline just to help you kind of track the story. So I'll cover kind of what happened in January through March, how we got here. Gail is going to tell us a little bit about the legal journey that we were facing through June. Amber is going to jump in and help us wade through the data weighting that we actually did in July. And then Erin's going to close us out with our August, September hackathon, and we'll share a link of our blog. So we do want this to be a conversation. So if you have any kind of clarifying questions or such, please do drop them in the chat. And one of the non-presenting members of the team will definitely interrupt. Okay, so how did we get here? I want to actually start with just recognize that USAID had a very strong data culture, and I'll tell you what that looked like in the education sector. So we had over 60 offices worldwide that submitted data regularly to headquarters. And I just wanted, everyone who's trying to collect data, we know how hard it is to actually have clear data flow. So just to say, this was a really impressive part of not just the culture, but also the actual systems and work, and people actually recognize that that was part of their jobs, collecting data, getting it all the way through. The USAID education portfolio included data across the continuum. So we had unique data sets. That's point number two. We had unique data sets in education around evaluation, assessment, observational, survey data, and all of these were across over 60, I want to say 80 actually, low and middle income countries. So that's what the LMI sees is. So what this meant is we really did have a really rich decades worth of data on USAID's programming, progress in learning in low and middle income countries. Um, a lot of this was actually mandated by the fact that we concretized data flow into our award language. So this was actually really important because we had a mandate to report to Congress under the READ Act. And what that meant is we had to report annually. We had to get all the data wrangled from the different missions. USAID offices are called missions. And then be able to actually say to Congress this investment and what it has achieved. What are the outcomes? What's the impact of this investment? So that was a really important element of it. With that strong data culture, however, there was one really critical weakness. The DEC, which is the Development I always get it wrong. Development Experience Clearinghouse, that's the DEC. It was a single point of failure. So everything that I just talked about coming from all these countries across decades was only mandated to come into this one data center that was run by USAID's data services team. So we now know in hindsight that was a single point of failure. At the time, we did not know that. So I'll end here and hand it off to Gail. What we had as of January 20th, 2025, an important date that marks in this entire story. The DEC was holding a significant history of the education portfolio that USAID had funded worldwide. We had over 2,500 files from 109 projects that were done in 43 countries over 20 years. That's just a lot of history, a lot of knowledge, a lot of data, a lot of information, both that the funder would have lost and that countries that these data were from would have lost. So I'm going to so let me just add one last point. The initiative that you're going to hear about today was about saving that data post January 20th. It was a mission, a labor of love from within the education team. And we found awesome champions across the board. So the speakers you're going to hear from are those champions. Gail was the champion in the legal team that was willing to work with us and figure out how do we do this. Amber and Kelly were willing to figure out how are we going to organize all this data. And then Erin and her team were willing to figure out how do we get it up into a repository that is public facing. So you're going to hear from all these champions, but first I'm going to hand it over to Gail to take us through our timeline next.
Great, thank you. Okay, so as you'll see on the timeline, we're in June 2025. I don't know if folks were watching what was happening at AID very closely, but a majority of the staff, probably, I'm going to throw a number out there that isn't quite right, but probably 75–80% of the staff were being RIFed July 2nd. So in June was when I first got notified that we had an opportunity to save some of this data. And when I say save, it exists, but it wasn't public facing. So an opportunity to get it into a place where it could actually be used. So we had to work really quickly. So I am going to I'm going to step back a minute. I said next slide's great, but I've got a lot to say here, but I want to stick to the time period so that we have lots of time for questions at the end. So I will hear it again, a quick plug for in January, we're going to have another session where we'll talk a little bit more about lessons learned. You'll also see I'm the only Gail Gerard in the world that I know of. So you can always find me on LinkedIn if you have some other questions that we haven't talked about here. Or hopefully there's some Q&A at the end. So anyway, I want to stick within my time allotment. So just to step back, pre-1980, the government had all the IP rights in any data that was funded with government funding. There was an understanding or a recognition in the late 70s, or in that time period, that wait, there's all this IP that's really just sitting on a shelf. It's not being used, and it would be better used if it was in the hands of researchers and the do-gooders. So originally, the Bayh-Dole Act was written for nonprofits, small business, and universities. It was very quickly expanded to for-profit companies too, that shifted the ownership to the private sector, with the government just retaining the license rights that they need to do what they need to do. Well, as all things, right, the devil is in the details. So if you had an assistance award, you had certain clauses. If you had a contract, you had other clauses. With this general concept, partner owns the rights, government gets a license. There are cases in there where the question is, what's the scope of the application of that license? And there are also a lot of requirements in there that basically water down ownership rights. Like, you may have to come back to the government to get permission to exercise your ownership rights. It may prohibit certain things, doing certain things with your IP. It may prohibit like the disclosure of certain IP. And then the issue, also a kind of a non-legal issue, is partner compliance. Did the partner comply with it? And are there non-legal issues, such as, was there third-party data where the rights were not obtained, even though it was required, that there would be a relationship issue, and we would have that with host governments. So that it's easy to say, that the partner has all the ownership rights. Well, the problem is there's just a lot of layers that go on top of that. And I did want to make clear that when I talk about IP, we're talking about copyright, trademark, and patents, and they're all handled a little bit differently. So it can get kind of complex. Add up on top of that is the government, under the Federal Records Act, has retention obligations. We also had a whole many years of the Open Data Act and other open data initiatives by the government in order to make all government funded data open to the public. And then you've all heard of FOIA, which is the Freedom of Information Act, which allows individuals to request data that is in the government's hot little hands. So that is kind of the legal. And so now we come to June of 2025. So the next slide. And we were operating with a reduced staff. About, 15 years ago, there was basically one dude, a contractor, and me who were dealing with data issues. Over the last 15 years, that grew to over 100 people who were helping us curate, maintain, and disseminate data. And then back in June of 25, we were back down to one guy again, right? So it was this arch of not having enough people to do this. And I was doing employment law. I was doing all sorts of other things for the agency. So what we needed to do was we needed to look at what were the terms that applied to this data. Was there pre-existing data, third-party data? There were some rogue IP clauses that would counteract what the standard clauses say. Department or the Center for Ed was really way ahead of a lot of the other places in aid, in that they were using Creative Commons to make sure this data was put out into the public. We had issues with PII. This didn't have a lot of PII in it, which makes it easier for us. So anyway, we were able to put in a data sharing agreement where we could identify the data sets. We had mainly data sets that we felt very comfortable that could go out into the public. We had a few that had more restricted. And so in this data sharing agreement, we identified the data sets. We I put the onus on IPCSR to ensure that any restricted data was protected, and other sensitive information in accordance with their policies that they have for all the other data sets that they so ably and responsibly curate. Okay, so that was a lot. That was a big data dump from me. But I'm going to now pass it over to Amber Gove, who's going to take it forward once the agreement was in place. And again, we have time hopefully at the end.
Great, thanks, Gail. So now we're in July, reviewing and cleaning these files. And next slide. So what did we wind up saving? As Hetal mentioned at the outset, we were looking at 20 years worth of data, 43 countries, 109 projects so far. Stay tuned. There may be more that we were able to pull up and make public. What did this mean just in terms of volumes and reams and quantities of paper? On the next slide, Hetal. We're talking about 312 reports, each associated with a data set, 565 instruments, 655 codebooks, and 997 data sets. Some of these data sets would have been broken into, let's say, baseline, midline, endline. All of this is sort of a mess of files, all named differently, by the way. There was not a whole lot of standardization in the nomenclature of how a file should be named. But these were all publicly available on the Data Development Library, a subset of the Development Experience Clearinghouse, until early March 2025, when that site went dark. So what was our process for organizing files? Step A, we were needed to put this all together. And thankfully, we had the help, as Hetal mentioned, of one of our collaborators, Callie Ardington of Data First, which is a research and data support center at the University of Cape Town. Data First is committed to advancing data access and use for development in Africa. So this project was squarely in their wheelhouse. In this and the next slide, I'm going to be sharing the 4 key steps that we went through with the team to process and organize these 2,500 plus files. So step A entailed creating and populating folders with the original data, which had come in a variety of forms. Some organizations had submitted zip files, others had submitted them in sort of a series of files, all maybe named with a link with different formats. And you'll see on the code on the right, just the script that Callie and team worked with to pull all of these folders out and organize them and get them in the right place. And then for that next step B, it was a process of unzipping all of these through a batch file process, allowing all the individual files within the folders to be organized and sorted. 2 more steps to go. Step C was organizing documents into those folders and files. The original structure had been based on each USAID project, with some countries having several projects over the course of decades. With the end user in mind, though, we reorganized these to group all of the files within a country together with subfolders for each project. The team sorted each of the files into those folders, tagging each file as a dataset or report or an instrument. You'll see on the screen here one sample project that actually was a project that my organization worked on, and the different types of names of files. So we were then classifying those as to whether it was a report, an instrument, or a data set or a code book. When the file name was not easily identifiable because of that lack of consistency or standards, we used human checkers, including myself, to verify that the content of each of that file was what we thought it might be from the name, and then assign it a particular label. And then our last step before making any of this public, step D, was checking for personally identifiable information, as highlighted before. We did that with a script and came up with variable names that we thought might potentially lead to any PII, and triple check that. In theory, none of the data sets should have been put up with PII in them, but we wanted to triple check before making this again public to the world. And so any of the variables that had more than 5 distinct values under any of these variable names were flagged, and those values were inspected to determine whether they did indeed include PII. And so in total, only 5 data sets of the nearly 1,000 that were reviewed had any sort of potentially identifiable information, and we cleaned those all before posting. We want this process to be transparent. We set up with the coding and the scripting so it could all be replicated again in case somewhere along the way we did something incorrectly. So if you're interested in receiving a copy of that code for organizing those files, please email us at usaid@gmail.com. We're working to identify a suitable location for sharing that organizing code. It won't necessarily be extremely useful for somebody in a different sector, but you could model what you're doing off of it, and so you couldn't run it exactly as it is, but you could model what you're doing after it and take it forward. So we hope that will be useful. And then I'm going to hand it over to Erin, who ably managed this next part of the process. Once we had all those files sorted, reviewed, and cleaned, we moved on to the really fun hackathon step, which Erin will tell you about.
Thanks, Amber. Yeah, so I'm going to cover the last steps of how we made these files available. Okay, next slide, please. So throughout 2025, there have been groups like the Data Rescue Project and the Research Data Access and Preservation Association that have hosted a bunch of data rescue events, and these are usually called hackathons. At these hackathons, people typically help create or review metadata, or they help upload rescued files to a repository. These efforts have helped create backups of collections like the Highfield Open database, the CDC's NIOSH data, that's the National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health, as well as the Department of Education's data lab tables. So for the USAID education data, we saw there was still quite a bit of work that had to be done to help future users understand the data. And so we thought a hackathon was a great solution. In August, RDAP, Data First, and ICPSR co-hosted a hackathon, and we had, I think, right around 110 people that attended that event. So at the hackathon, participants worked in small groups and they filled out key metadata for each data set. So this included things like summary descriptions, sample characteristics, languages, the assessments that were included. And we decided that we would group the studies by their country of data collection. So people also wrote summaries for each country as well. And ultimately, this metadata is going to help future users understand the study population and the topics that are covered in the data. So thanks to these volunteers, we were able to proceed to the final step of this undertaking, which was preserving the data in a trusted repository. Data Lumos was selected as the archive to hold these data sets. Data Lumos is an archive within ICPSR, and it was launched in 2017 amid concerns about US government data loss. So for those of you who are unfamiliar with ICPSR, Heather gave a little intro earlier, but ICPSR is the world's largest social science data archive, and we're based at the University of Michigan. And Data Lumos was determined to be a good home for this collection for a few reasons. First is that ICPSR is a Core Trust Seal trusted digital repository, and we won the National Award for Museum and Library Services in 2019. So we follow long-term preservation practices for digital data and metadata. What this basically means is that we've taken measures within ICPSR and within our infrastructure and policies to preserve digital data and metadata for as long as necessary. This includes things like storing data files in multiple formats and in multiple locations to prevent catastrophic loss. Data Lumos is also free. You just create a login. You don't have to have a tie to an institution to use it. Data Lumos also does not display information about who publishes data in the archive. that information's only accessible to a small number of staff who have backend admin permissions. And DataLumos also allows for immediate self-publishing of files. So however you upload it is how it will appear on the site. And lastly, the Data Rescue Project, which started in 2025 to address these concerns about federal data loss. They rely on DataLumos to store the data that they help rescue. The data archived in DataLumos is really varied. I think we might have more than 80 agencies' data represented in here to some degree. We've got Department of Veterans Affairs, Homeland Security, Department of Transportation, Centers for Disease Control, as well as many, many more. On this slide, it's a graph showing DataLumos's growth in 2025. So you can see that it's increasing steadily from around 100 projects at the beginning of the year to over 1,600 here in December. When I say projects, in the case of this graph, I mean deposit submissions. So that could be a single data set or that submission could contain a larger collection. So this is up to the person who submits the deposit. Okay. All right. So staff from ICPSR and Data First added the USAID education collection to DataLumos. As a reminder, we decided to group the USAID data by country. So for example, all the Nigerian data sets are available in one project, all the Peruvian data sets are in another. So this screenshot shows what a published project looks like on DataLumos. It uses Nepal as an example. You can't see all of the metadata fields in this screenshot, but the summary and other metadata fields were created by the hackathon attendees, and it helps people understand what's going to be inside the project when you download it. For the USAID data specifically, when you download a project, there's also a spreadsheet that we included that gives more information about the characteristics of each project within this project. And that spreadsheet was also created due to work in the hackathon. So the more information that's provided with the DataLumos project, the better. Our search doesn't look within files that get uploaded to the archives, so filling out as many fields in the deposit form as possible makes it easier for someone to find the right data within the archive, particularly as the archive grows in size. So oh, no, there it is. Thank you, Amber. We put a link in the chat so you can view the full USAID education collection on DataLumos. Ultimately, we archived about 2,500 files within 43 DataLumos projects. These projects represent data from 43 countries, and they cover 109 education projects and span over 20 years. Okay, next slide, please. All right. So access to this data had already been removed. So this really was an example of real data rescue effort. And now the data can be accessed and used again. After the data were published on DataLumos in October, we wrote a post for the What Works Hub for Global Education blog. And if you want more info about what we covered today, please feel free to check it out. And if you're interested in getting involved with data rescue, there are a few ways you can do that. If there's specific government data that you're concerned about, you can upload backup copies to DataLumos. Like I mentioned earlier, it's a crowdsourced archive. Anybody can contribute to it, and so we encourage you to do so. And so if you already have backup copies and you want others to be able to use them, you can add them to DataLumos. If you are connected to any USAID funded projects that haven't published their data yet, we'd love to work with you to help make that happen. And if you're interested in helping out with data rescue in general and volunteering as your time allows, you can sign up to be a volunteer with the Data Rescue Project. This can take as much or as little time as you wish. They help coordinate hundreds of volunteers. So there are a couple of ways to get in contact with us. For any questions related to the USAID education data or USAID more broadly, you can reach us at usaideducationdata@gmail.com. And for questions about ICPSR, Data Lumos, or data rescue more broadly, you can reach out to us at icpsr-data-rescue@umich.edu. All right, and I am going to hand it back to Hetal, and she's going to circle us back.
All right. So you saw the story from January through October. We have a second session in January next year. I guess if we had picked a January 20th date, that would have been tongue-in-cheek funny. But it's at the end of January, and we'll come back and kind of what's next, right? So this takes you through what happened up until now. But this data is not just, data, good luck. We really want to be thoughtful about what comes next. So we're going to have a second session. But we parked a couple of reflections here that just from the 4 different sections of the story. And I'll just go through them briefly. This can be a starting point for discussion, or you might have different questions, but just kind of leave you with where we are in our thinking. One is, whose data is it anyway? We had data from so many countries, children in countries that, they have much better use with this data and making sure the people who have use for it and can use it to make decisions actually can access it. So this question of whose data is it really, really keeps continuing to come back to us. And let's not be extractive. How do we have that full circle of data sharing? Second, from Gail's presentation, it's complicated, right? Regulations, licensing rights, PII, and how this all intersects can have real consequences for how data is stored and who can access it, both at the time of collection, but actually in longer term and where it can even go. So hindsight is 2020. What does this mean for what we might want to do in the future? Third, from the work that we had to do, even though we had Gail said, we had almost 100 people in the data services team that was monitoring and curating this data. It still took a lot of work after the fact to get it organized in a way that we can really have it be useful. So data librarians are so important. How do we make sure that they're part of the future and the story and the support structures that we invest in and pursue? And last, long-term plans. I think when we collect data, we always have thoughts around IRB and consent statements, who should have access, who shouldn't. It's kind of more grounded in the current team and who is using it, but not these long-term plans for where should we preserve the data. What is the long-term plan for where it should go? And redundancy, I talked about the single point of failure. We learn redundancy is a good thing. Let's have data in many places for many people to access in many ways. That's really when it's truly equitable and shared and available to the wider sector to use in ways that are useful to them. So I'll end there. Actually, no, sorry. I have one last slide just to ask you to join us again on January 30th, same time, same place. And we'll be doing part 2 of what's next from loss to recovery, loss to legacy. All right, I guess I'm going to stop sharing and we can open it up for questions.
Yeah, thank you so much, all of you. First of all, for doing what you did. And second of all, for taking time to share your story with us. It is a great way for us to kind of wrap up 2025. A lot of us kind of started with similar shocks to the one that you shared from the beginning of the year. So this is a really inspiring way to have our last Talking Data Equity, and we're very glad you're coming back. So there's lots and lots of questions from the practical to the theoretical, and I can highlight some from the chat. But before I do that, if there's anybody in the room that wants to turn their microphone on and ask a question or share a reflection, this is your opportunity to do that. If possible, it usually works best if you can raise your Zoom hand. So in the reactions part of Zoom, there's something called raise your hand. If you can find that, that's usually a nice way for us to be able to identify you and turn your microphone on. If that doesn't work for you or you don't see that button, you can turn your microphone on and ask your question. That is all right.
Can I just jump in real quick and say
yeah.
what Hatal was saying at the end about having redundancies? And one of the things that came up a lot was over the past 15 years is that about wanting to put this data in third-party repositories, and we would always say, "Oh, no, no, no! They may not be there tomorrow. We need to have it at 8."
That is such an important and useful story. Yeah, absolutely, for sure. Gail, while I have you, there's a number of questions that came up in the chat during your slides, and I think they can kind of be summarized to be, can you tell us a little bit about who, and if you think it's anything that you all think is not wise to share is okay. But the question is, can you tell us a little bit more about like who from the U.S. government had to sign this agreement?
Yeah, so within USAID, we had the automated directive system, which was agency policy, and it was where we could also look to see where some of kind of the practical policy of implementing laws, and one of them was authorities, who had authority to sign what.
Right.
Now, after January, the ADS was not available publicly, but we were still using it. And so when we're talking about education data, then who had the authority to kind of sign an agreement on that? It would be within IPI, which was they changed the name so often, it's been so long, but it was the group that had the Center for Education in it. And we happened to have where most, so many people had been riffed, and we didn't, a lot of agents, groups didn't even have, but we happened to have someone who was the head of IPI that was still there. And I work with her closely. And so we were able to get that signed by her.
Wow. So that's very good that person was still employed and still had access to their devices, and
because otherwise it may have had to go up a level. And I don't know if going up a level, if someone would have cared enough or been willing to do it.
Yeah. Interesting. And another question, I don't know if this one, Gail, is specifically for you. It was asked by several different people at several different points, but is any of that data owned or at least partially owned by the countries in which it was collected? Or is it accessible by those countries? And
I'm happy to, that was sort of an ongoing issue that we had at USAID, where we had this agreement with the partner, and the partner had an obligation to make sure that all of the data that we were funding had the appropriate license rights that USAID could assert its license rights.
right.
the problem was, with host governments, we frequently had people that were embedded in the different ministries, working very closely with them, programs that have been going on for a long, 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 long time. So there weren't necessarily formal agreements with the host government as to the understanding of what was going to happen with that data.
Right.
And so that was something that we were trying to figure out. Do we, and we also, when we had hundreds of partners, do you want hundreds of different entities going and trying to negotiate license rights with host governments? That could get messy. And honestly, we had not really solved that issue very well. And so we were relying on the government license rights. Now, did they have copies of the data? And did they potentially own it if it was created by them? Yes. If it was created by the partner, it could be host country by host country, right? Because
Right.
it would potentially rely on whatever their IP laws were.
Yeah. It's like a John Grisham novel for education data. uh, um, Presumably, because it's now in Data Lumos, if you were like the Minister of Education for Nepal, you could now log in and have access to that data, regardless of like whether it was collected by USAID or a private, partner or the government. Is that correct? Is my understanding correct there?
Yes,
Go ahead, Anne.
that's correct. And that did contribute to our decision to put the data in Data Lumos. There's no paywall for Data Lumos. You don't have to have a certain
Hmm.
institutional affiliation
Right.
to use it, which sometimes you do need that for other archives at ICPSR.
Right.
Data Lumos really is open, and that was really important for this data in particular.
Hmm. Well done. That's very good. Okay, I am scrolling. I think this is partially answered, and you also may be way out of your wheelhouse, but do you think that all of the other USAID data was lost?
I don't think data has been lost. It's nothing in, okay, and I left September 2nd with 99% of my other colleagues were gone by then.
Right.
But my understanding is that data still exists. It's just not available to the public. I would say too that the last guy standing on the data side, he is now working over at state, and he is an amazing individual and a lover of data. So I have no doubt that this is on his radar, that at some time this data that has been behind, we're within the bowels of USAID will make rear its head again.
That's fascinating.
If I can just add, actually, one of the way back in the how we got here, one of the turning points was, like Gail said, there was not a risk that it was just going to get deleted. It was just going to no longer be accessible. So at that time, the plan was, and I assume happened, that all the data was going to go over to State Department. But even what Gail was talking about, USAID had a long history of data collection and sharing and, data librarians. State just doesn't have that infrastructure.
Right.
They don't have something like the deck. So one of the things that the data champion was talking about is like, we can curate and organize all this, and state wants all of it because they knew they needed all this evidence to, if they need in the future to like say, what did we do in education? We should have it. The problem was it was only going to be internally available. It would not have been externally available. So that was part of the thinking of like, okay, they are not deleting it, they're preserving it, but it's only going to be State Department employees now that can access it in the future. So unless State Department does have a knowledge repository that becomes public facing, where they can share this and other data, those data are just kind of internally available now, is my understanding.
except for under potentially the Freedom of Information Act, that individuals could request data.
I FOIA'd all of the data on the deck, and I'm still waiting for my FOIA to come through. I
Yes.
assume because
Th-
FOIA office is still empty.
Yes, that's the other thing is right now USAID has maybe one FOIA person, if that. And yeah, but my understanding was state was going to take over the FOIA function. And so maybe when things get going a little bit better.
Amber, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. Gail, you had, since there may be some implementing partner staff still in their implementing partner organizations on the line, and I know you'd been really helpful in helping me think through what organizations who still might have some data or teaching and learning materials or reports that they'd maybe already submitted but are no longer publicly available. What are those organizations' rights? And I know we're going to talk about this more in January. And what should they maybe think about what to do with that material?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, the devil's in the details, right? So they should, talk to their lawyers, go look at their agreements to see what the terms are. If if it was an assistance award, then the chances are that they have the full ownership and that there are very few restrictions on the data, and they have every right to share that data. Just being cognizant of safety and security of individual identifying information. If it was a contract, there may be some more restrictions. It may require going back to USAID and getting permission to release it, which given the current posture is going to be very difficult to find somebody. But there are people there that still do care about this, I think, and I think any of us could, or Hatal and I could help find somebody if that's the case.
Very
But
helpful.
again, ownership. Partners have ownership.
So partners have
Well,
ownership.
okay. The other exception
Yeah.
is I mentioned earlier, it's the rogue clause. So I don't know where this thing came from. It's been around for probably 10 years or more. Some contracting officer somewhere at AID wrote a clause that said that the government has ownership of any data. It should never have been written. It should not have been in there. And it got cut and pasted into many awards. I would see it frequently. So if your award has that rogue data clause in it, then that actually we had. I mean, the problem is now the people thing, right? We had frequently had done modifications to awards to get that taken out because it shouldn't have been in there. So that's the kind of the one caveat.
Right. So yes. So if you are here today and sitting on data that you think is valuable, talk to somebody with some legal knowledge about this before sharing it publicly. But there are people out there that can help you decide and understand the legal pros and cons. And on that note, there are a lot of people in the chat that are kind of, let's say, in awe of your optimism that behind the scenes the data is not being destroyed, even if it's not publicly available. So we hope to share in your optimism that all of that data is still there.
But can I add that there was at least one, if not more, lawsuits that were ensuring that even as the staff whittles down that data should not be being deleted.
That's good to know. Excellent. There's a few questions here that are kind of what to do next. And let me invite those people to join us on January 30th, because we are having part 2 of this very same team of people come back on January 30th, same time, noon, Toronto, New York City time, same Zoom link. And we're going to talk about ways to move forward. This part was really kind of what did we do in the past, and part 2 will be much more getting current and looking forward. Gail, do you have one more thing you want to say? Oh, okay. Look, I didn't want to be talking over you. So on that note, let me say one more time and really amplify what's going on in the chat, which is just a huge, huge heroes thank you to Hetal, Aaron, Gail, and Amber for the work that you did. And when you were doing it, you did not know how bad things were going to get and just what was going to happen. And you did it anyway. And we don't take that for granted around here. That is huge and important. And we are genuinely deeply grateful for your willingness because none of us take that for granted anymore. And then second, thank you for taking time in a very busy December to come and share the details with us. It has been something I personally have been looking forward to for weeks, exceeded my expectations. And we're really excited to see you back in January. We will all be here again. So thank you to the four of you and to everybody who is attending on this Friday in December. We all count talking data equity would be nothing without the data equity community, without all of you who share your interesting ideas and your interesting suggestions about what we should talk about and what we should do. So take really, really good care of yourselves. You're very, very important part of this community. You mean a lot to us. And Talking Data Equity is back in January, and you can always check our homepage to see who is coming up. We have, I think, 2 Talking Data Equities in January prior to part 2 of this session. And then on the 30th, we will have part 2. And thank you all so much. Talk to you later.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Heather.